The title of this video is not clickbait. We have found 10 stories that perfectly define the phrase, dumbest ways people died. These aren't just accidents, they're masterpieces of poor judgment, from fighting cars with magic to building wingsuits out of bed sheets. Consider this your official instruction manual on how not to win a Darwin Award. Let's dive into the shallow end of the gene pool. 1. We begin our journey into the abyss of human intelligence in the frozen hinterlands of Russia, a place where the winters are long, the dash cams are ubiquitous, and the grasp on Newtonian physics is occasionally optimistic. Our protagonist is a man named Igor, a local legend in his own mind who had spent the better part of a year binge-watching questionable martial arts tutorials on YouTube. Igor wasn't interested in cardio or sparring. No, he was interested in Qi, the mystical life force energy that flows through all things. After a few months of heavy drinking and light meditation, Igor became convinced that he had unlocked the secrets of the universe. He believed, with the unshakable confidence of a toddler wearing a superhero cape, that he could manipulate kinetic energy with his mind. He told his friends that his body had become a fortress, a vessel so charged with cosmic power that physical objects could no longer harm him. To prove this theory, which I must remind you contradicted roughly 300 years of scientific consensus, Igor devised the ultimate test. He didn't start small, like stopping a bicycle or catching a baseball. No, Igor went straight for the heavyweight title fight against the laws of motion. He dragged his skeptical friend Dmitry out to a desolate stretch of icy asphalt on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Igor positioned himself in the middle of the road, adopted a stance that looked like a constipated crane, and radioed Dmitry, who was sitting in a beat-up sedan about a quarter-mile away. The instructions were simple, terrifying, and incredibly stupid. Drive at me, 50 miles per hour, do not touch the brakes. I will stop you with the energy shield of my ancestors. Now put yourself in Dmitry's shoes. He's looking at his friend who is standing unprotected in traffic, demanding to be run over in the name of spiritual enlightenment. Dmitry hesitated, likely questioning every life choice that led him to this moment. But Igor was insistent. He screamed over the radio that fear was the only enemy, and that braking would insult his honor. So, against his better judgment, Dmitry hit the gas. The car accelerated, the engine roaring like a warning siren that Igor was too enlightened to hear. As the 2 tons of steel barreled towards him at highway speeds, Igor didn't flinch. He didn't dive. He simply extended his palms, closed his eyes, and projected his Qi. Unfortunately for Igor, kinetic energy is calculated by mass times velocity squared, and in this equation, his Qi was equal to 0. The car hit him with the force of, well, a car hitting a person. There was no magical barrier, no slow-motion force field, just the wet, crunchy sound of reality asserting its dominance. Igor was flattened instantly, transforming from a biological entity into a physics lesson in less than a second. He died on impact, proving that while faith can move mountains, it cannot stop a 1998 Honda Civic. His legacy is now a cautionary tale in Russian traffic safety brochures, reminding us all that if you fight a car with your bare hands, the car will remain undefeated every single time. 2. Let's transition from the icy roads of Russia to the humid, tiled confines of a suburban bathroom, the natural habitat of our next visionary, a man we'll call Gary the germaphobe. Gary was a man possessed by a singular, burning desire. He wanted his bathroom grout to be not just clean, but spiritually pure. He viewed mold spores not as a household nuisance, but as personal enemies that had invaded his sovereign territory. But Gary had a problem. The commercial cleaners he bought at the supermarket just weren't cutting it. They were too safe, too regulated, too approved for human use by the FDA. He wanted the nuclear option. He wanted a cleaner that would make the dirt regret ever existing. And this is where Gary's complete lack of high school chemistry knowledge became a lethal weapon. One Saturday morning, he stood before his open cleaning cabinet, eyes darting between a gallon jug of industrial-strength bleach and a bottle of heavy-duty ammonia. In his simple, linear mind, he was doing basic math. If bleach is powerful and ammonia is powerful, then mixing them together must be twice as powerful. It was the logic of a child mixing all the sodas at a fountain, but with potential war crimes as the result. He grabbed a 5-gallon bucket, placed it in the center of his small, windowless bathroom, and prepared for his magnum opus. He didn't turn on the fan because he didn't want the cleaning magic to escape. He poured in the bleach, filling the room with that familiar swimming pool smell. Then, with the confidence of a medieval alchemist discovering gold, he added the ammonia. Now, for those of you who slept through science class, let me explain what Gary just did. He didn't create a super cleaner. He recreated the trenches of World War I. The reaction between sodium hypochlorite, bleach, and ammonia instantly produces chloramine gas, a highly toxic, corrosive vapor that attacks the respiratory system with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The bucket immediately began to fizz and froth, releasing a dense, invisible cloud of death. Gary, bless his heart, likely leaned in to inspect his creation, thinking, "Ah, look at it sizzle. That means it's working." And he was right. It was working perfectly. The gas hit his lungs, turning the moisture in his respiratory tract into hydrochloric acid. The coughing started instantly, a violent, hacking spasm that should have been his cue to run. But chloramine gas also burns the eyes and disorients the brain. Trapped in that small, unventilated kill box, Gary was overwhelmed before he could even reach for the door handle. He collapsed on the very floor he was so desperate to clean, surrounded by the fumes of his own ignorance. When they found him, the bathroom was indeed sterile, mostly because nothing biological could survive in that atmosphere for a 50-mile radius. Gary had achieved his goal of the ultimate clean, but he had paid the ultimate price, leaving the gene pool a little bit smarter and a whole lot cleaner. 3. There is a concept in military strategy called force multiplication, which is about using tools to make yourself more effective in combat. And then there is whatever Kevin was doing. Kevin was a career criminal, though to call him a professional would be an insult to anyone who actually works for a living. His resume was a series of botched petty thefts and misdemeanors, but today, he decided it was time for the big leagues. He needed quick cash, and he decided the best place to get it was a local retail establishment. But Kevin didn't choose a liquor store, or a gas station, or a bakery. No, Kevin decided to rob a gun store. Let that sink in for a moment. He targeted a building where the entire inventory is designed to terminate life, and where the clientele consists exclusively of people who are passionate about weapons. But the stupidity didn't stop at target selection. It extended to his loadout. Kevin didn't have a gun. He didn't even have a knife. Kevin brought a baseball bat, a wooden Louisville slugger. He was bringing a stick to a shootout. The logic, if we can be generous enough to call it that, was presumably that he would storm in, act crazy, and everyone would be too intimidated to reach for their holsters. It was a plan that relied on the element of surprise and the assumption that gun owners are easily frightened by sporting equipment. Kevin parked his car, pulled up his hoodie, and marched toward the entrance of Bob's Ballistics, gripping his bat like he was stepping up to the plate at the World Series of Bad Decisions. He kicked the door open, stormed inside, and smashed the glass display case nearest the entrance, screaming, "Nobody move! Give me the money!" Now, the owner of the store, let's call him Bob, was standing behind the counter. It was a slow Tuesday, and Bob was lovingly polishing his personal 12-gauge shotgun, a weapon he kept fully loaded and staged on the counter specifically for moments like this. Bob looked up, saw a man waving a piece of wood around, and likely felt a mixture of confusion and pity. The threat assessment took less than a microsecond. You have a man with a melee weapon at a distance of 20 feet versus a man with a boomstick that can remove a door from its hinges. Kevin took a step forward, raising the bat for intimidation. Bob didn't even have to aim. He just pointed the business end of the shotgun in the general direction of the noise and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap in the confined space. The result was exactly what you would expect when lead meets flesh at close range. Kevin was lifted off his feet and deposited back out the front door he had just entered, his robbery attempt lasting a grand total of 6 seconds. He didn't even make it past the welcome mat. The police report was incredibly short. There was no investigation needed, no manhunt, no mystery. Just a guy who brought a stick to a gunfight and found out that real life isn't a video game where you can tank a shotgun blast because you have high hit points. Kevin died as he lived, underprepared, overconfident, and completely out of his depth. 4. In the grand pantheon of terrible ideas, few can compete with the specific brand of logic found in a suburban playground at 3 in the morning, usually fueled by cheap lager and an overestimation of one's own athletic ability. Our protagonist for this gravity-defying disaster is a 34-year-old man named Barnaby, a local legend in the pub scene whose grasp of physics was stuck firmly in the cartoon universe. Barnaby had a lifelong obsession, a white whale that had haunted him since primary school. The legend of the 360-degree swing loop. We've all heard the myth. If you pump your legs hard enough, if you go high enough, you can flip over the top bar and become a god of the playground. Most of us grow up, learn about gravity, and realize this is impossible on a standard chain swing. Barnaby, however, treated this physical limitation not as a fact, but as a personal challenge from Isaac Newton himself. On a wet, gloomy Tuesday night in northern England, Barnaby marched his 2 equally intoxicated friends to the local park, determined to make history. He squeezed his adult-sized hips into a rubber seat designed for a toddler, a process that required lubricant and a disturbing amount of force, and began his ascent. He instructed his friends to push him, demanding more power with every swing. "Higher!" he screamed, his face a mask of sheer determination and impending doom. His friends, loyal enablers of catastrophe, shoved him with all their might, sending Barnaby soaring into the night sky. He went past the horizontal. He went past the point of no return. He was staring directly at the stars, his pockets emptying of loose change and dignity. But here is the critical science lesson that Barnaby missed. Playground swings are pendulums, not rigid roller coasters. They rely entirely on tension to keep the rider safe. As long as you are below the bar, centrifugal force and gravity work together to keep the chain tight. But the moment you go above the bar without the velocity of a jet engine, gravity gets confused. Barnaby hit the absolute vertical apex, poised upside down like a bat with a death wish. For a glorious microsecond, he felt weightless. Then the chains went slack. They didn't loop. They collapsed like wet noodles. Without the tension of the chains to guide him in a circle, Barnaby didn't continue the arc. He simply stopped moving forward and started moving downward. He plummeted vertically, head first, from a height of about 12 feet, straight toward the unforgiving concrete slab below. It wasn't a swing anymore. It was a free fall. The impact was sickeningly instant. A wet thud that silenced the cheers of his friends and likely traumatized the local wildlife. Barnaby didn't stick the landing stuck him. He died instantly of catastrophic cranial trauma, effectively turning a children's recreational device into a medieval execution method. The police report noted that while Barnaby failed to break the laws of physics, he successfully broke everything else, proving that while you can reach for the stars, the ground is always waiting to catch you, and concrete has absolutely zero sense of humor. 5. The world of amateur magic is a fascinating place, mostly because it combines the ego of a rock star with the safety standards of a discount circus. Enter Hans, a German escape artist who firmly believed he was the reincarnation of Harry Houdini, despite having the situational awareness of a goldfish. Hans had spent the last year bragging to anyone who would listen about his upcoming masterwork, a stunt he ominously titled The Water Tomb. The premise was classic, terrifying, and, if performed correctly, extremely dangerous. He would be chained inside a reinforced glass tank, which would then be filled with water. His goal was to pick the locks on his chains and emerge triumphant before his lungs gave out. To prepare, Hans spent thousands of euros on a custom-built tank. Being a perfectionist with a flair for the dramatic, he insisted on using triple-paned acoustic glass. "I want total silence inside," he told his builders. "I want to be alone with my struggle. It makes it more artistic." Remember this detail. It is the architect of his doom. On the night of the performance, a small crowd of friends, family, and curious locals gathered in a rented warehouse. Hans, wearing a shimmering wetsuit that left nothing to the imagination, stepped into the tank. His assistants, following a strict protocol, wrapped heavy steel chains around his chest, wrists, and ankles, securing them with industrial-grade padlocks. Hans took a deep, dramatic breath, winked at the audience, and signaled for the water. The pumps roared to life. Cold, murky water began to rise, past his ankles, his knees, his waist. The clock was ticking. Hans waited until the water reached his chest to begin his escape. He reached into the secret pocket of his wetsuit, the one specifically sewn to hold his lockpicking kit. His fingers grasped nothing. Empty fabric. A jolt of electricity shot through his brain. He frantically checked his other pockets. Nothing. Then, in a moment of cinematic horror, he looked through the glass. There, sitting on a folding table about 5 feet away, bathed in the warm glow of a spotlight, was his leather case of lockpicks. He had taken them out to polish them one last time for the shine, and, in his pre-show nervousness, had simply walked away without them. Panic, primal and overwhelming, set in. He started screaming. He pounded on the glass with his chained hands. "Stop! Open it! The picks are out there!" But the acoustic glass, the soundproofing he had paid extra for, worked perfectly. Outside, the audience saw a man thrashing, screaming silently, his face contorted in agony. They turned to each other and whispered, "Wow, look at that acting. He really sells the fear, doesn't he?" His assistant smiled and gave him thumbs-ups, thinking the thrashing was part of the show. The water rose over his head. Hans spent his final minutes watching his friends applaud his own drowning, trapped in a silent, watery coffin of his own design. He died not because the trick was too hard, but because he forgot his keys, proving that in the world of survival, a good memory is far more valuable than a dramatic flair. 6. There is a fine line between a pioneer of aviation and a man jumping off a roof with a bedsheet, and our next hero, Franz, decided to blur that line until it was completely invisible. Franz was a fervent believer in the do-it-yourself philosophy, applying it to everything from home plumbing to open-heart surgery. His latest obsession was human flight. He had watched hours of footage of professional wingsuit pilots gliding gracefully over the Swiss Alps, and he came to a conclusion that only a truly confident idiot could reach. "I can build that cheaper." Franz scoffed at the idea of paying thousands of dollars for a professionally engineered suit made of advanced ripstop nylon and aerodynamic baffles. Instead, he raided his linen closet. He spent a weekend bent over his grandmother's sewing machine, stitching together a Frankenstein's monster of a flight suit using high thread count Egyptian cotton sheets, a few plastic shower curtains for rigidity, and enough silver duct tape to repair a sinking Titanic. He didn't consult an engineer. He didn't use a wind tunnel. He used his imagination and a staple gun. Confident in his creation, Franz bypassed the logical step of testing the suit with a sandbag or a dummy. No, he drove straight to a decommissioned radio tower in the countryside, a rusting steel needle that pierced the clouds. He climbed the maintenance ladder for an hour, sweating in his cotton cocoon, until he reached the platform, hundreds of feet above the rocky terrain. The wind whipped at his suit, making the loose fabric flap violently, a warning sign that Franz interpreted as aerodynamic readiness. He turned on his GoPro, looked into the lens, and shouted, "Today man becomes bird." Then he leapt into the void. Now, real wingsuits work by creating an airfoil, a shape that generates lift. Franz's suit created something else entirely: drag. Massive, chaotic, unchecked drag. The bed sheets didn't inflate. They billowed up over his head like a violently aggressive laundry bag, blinding him and pinning his arms to his sides. Instead of gliding forward, Franz dropped like a stone wrapped in linen. The physics were brutal and immediate. He didn't soar. He plummeted at terminal velocity, a screaming ball of cotton and regret. The flight lasted approximately 4 seconds, giving him just enough time to realize that gravity doesn't care about your crafting skills. He hit the ground with the impact of a meteorite, leaving a crater that was equal parts tragedy and comedy. The investigation was short. The police simply had to look at the GoPro footage to see a man willingly jump to his death wearing bedding. Franz wanted to fly with the eagles, but he ended up diving with the ostriches, proving once and for all that while enthusiasm is great, aerodynamics is a strict science that does not offer refunds for homemade equipment. 7. New Zealand is often called the adventure capital of the world, a land where the locals look at a perfectly safe mountain and think, I bet I could throw myself off that. It is a country that gave us bungee jumping, zorbing, and now our next contender for the Darwin Award, a 26-year-old adrenaline junkie named Liam. Liam was the kind of guy who found normal sports like football or tennis to be insultingly safe. If there wasn't at least a 15% chance of severe bodily harm, he wasn't interested. His latest obsession was volcano boarding, a sport that involves hiking up an active volcano, strapping a piece of plywood to your feet, and sliding down the ash slopes at breakneck speeds. It's basically sledding, but if you crash, you don't hit snow. You hit solidified lava and sulfuric acid. On this particular day, Liam hiked up Mount Yasur, an active volcano on Tanna Island that has been erupting nearly continuously for centuries. Most sensible people stand at the rim, take a photo, and leave. Liam, however, saw the danger active volcanic area, signs as a challenge to his masculinity. He bypassed the designated safe zones, ignoring the frantic waving of the local tour guides who were screaming something that loosely translated to, "Don't be an idiot." Liam found a steep, untouched slope of ash that looked perfect for a high-speed descent. He strapped onto his board, turned his GoPro to face his grinning, overconfident mug, and launched himself down the mountain. The speed was exhilarating. The wind whipped past his helmet, the ash flew up like gray snow, and for a moment, he was the king of the world. But here is the thing about active volcanoes. They are not groomed ski slopes. They are geological pressure cookers. Liam was carving hard to the left when he hit a patch of loose, unstable scree, essentially gravel on ball bearings. He lost control instantly. The board went one way and Liam went the other, sliding uncontrollably on his back like a turtle on ice. He wasn't sliding toward a snowbank, though. He was sliding directly toward a fumarole, a geothermal vent that blasts superheated steam straight from the Earth's magma chamber. These vents can reach temperatures of over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Liam tried to dig his heels in, tried to claw at the ash, but momentum is a cruel mistress. He slid feet first directly into the vent's opening. The steam wasn't just hot, it was a pressurized jet of boiling vapor. He was effectively flash-cooked in seconds, like a lobster that had made a series of terrible life choices. By the time the rescue team could even get close enough to assess the situation, which took hours because of the heat, Liam was long gone. He wanted an extreme experience, and the volcano obliged, providing him with the most extreme temperature change a human body can experience. He died doing what he loved, ignoring safety warnings and proving that nature always hits harder than you do. 8. There is a special place in the Hall of Shame for people who think that terrifying their loved ones is a love language. Enter Sarah, a 24-year-old content creator from Arizona whose entire personality revolved around pulling elaborate, heart-stopping pranks on her long-suffering boyfriend, Mike. Sarah viewed the world through the lens of a smartphone camera, and she saw safety barriers not as life-saving devices, but as annoying obstructions to her creative vision. On a vacation to the Grand Canyon, a place that kills roughly 12 people a year just by being steep, Sarah decided to orchestrate the ultimate scare. The plan was simple, in a chaotic, evil sort of way. While Mike was buying water at the gift shop, she would climb over the safety railing, hide on a small sandstone ledge just below the rim, and then jump out and scream when he walked by looking for her. In her mind, this would result in a hilarious viral video. In reality, she was entrusting her life to a piece of sedimentary rock that had been eroding since the dinosaurs walked the earth. She waited for a gap in the tourists, hiked up her skirt, and hopped over the heavy steel railing that was explicitly designed to keep humans on the living side of the canyon. She spotted a ledge about 4 feet down, a flat, seemingly sturdy shelf of red sandstone. With the confidence of a mountain goat but the geological knowledge of a hamster, she leaped onto the ledge with gusto to stick the landing. But sandstone is not concrete. It is essentially sand held together by pressure and time, and it hates sudden impacts. The moment Sarah's weight landed on the shelf, the rock fractured. It didn't crack slowly, it sheared off completely. The ledge she was aiming for simply detached from the canyon wall, crumbling into dust and gravel instantly. Sarah didn't get to hide. She didn't get to scream, "Boo!" She barely had time to register that the ground had betrayed her. She fell, along with about 300 pounds of rock, plummeting into the abyss. The drop at that specific point was over 600 feet. Mike returned with the water bottles just in time to hear the screams of horrified bystanders pointing at the empty space where his girlfriend used to be. Sarah wanted to drop a bombshell prank on her boyfriend. Instead, she just dropped. She died instantly upon impact with the canyon floor, a tragic reminder that while love might be forever, gravity is immediate, non-negotiable, and has absolutely zero patience for TikTok trends. 9. Let's head out to the rural backcountry, where the grass is green, the tractors are loud, and the engineering permits are non-existent. Our protagonist is a 45-year-old man named Cletus, a backyard tinkerer who operated under the firm belief that safety standards were just a way for the government to charge you extra money. Cletus had a vision. He looked at the two massive oak trees in his backyard, separated by about 50 feet of sloping lawn, and thought, "I need a zipline." Now, a professional zipline uses aircraft-grade steel cable, tensioners, and rock-climbing harnesses. Cletus, however, had a shed full of junk and a can-do attitude. He found a spool of old galvanized clothesline wire, the kind meant to hold up wet socks, not a fully grown adult male. He climbed a ladder and wrapped the wire around the first tree, securing it with a series of knots that would make a sailor cry. He then dragged the wire to the second tree, pulled it tight with his bare hands, which means it wasn't tight at all, and tied it off. For the handle, he used a rusted metal pipe he found in the dirt, sliding it over the wire. But the pièce de résistance of this disaster was the landing zone. Directly beneath the midpoint of the line, the lowest point of the sag, was a massive, chaotic pile of jagged scrap metal, old tractor parts, and rusty, harrowing discs that Cletus had been meaning to clean up for 3 years. Did he move the pile? No. He figured he would just lift his legs up when he flew over it. It was a plan with zero margin for error. Cletus climbed the starting tree, grabbed his rusty pipe handle, and shouted to his wife to "Watch this!" He stepped off the branch. For the first 10 feet, things went okay. But then physics kicked in. The thin clothesline wire, under the sudden dynamic load of a 200-pound man, stretched violently. It didn't break immediately. It sagged, deeply. Instead of gliding across the yard, Cletus plummeted into a steep V shape, sliding uncontrollably toward the center. The lowest point. The wire, screaming under the tension, snapped with a sound like a gunshot right as he reached the bottom of the arc. Cletus didn't swing. He dropped. He fell straight down from a height of about 12 feet, landing directly on the pile of rusty farm equipment he had ignored. He didn't just break a leg. He was impaled on the tines of an old cultivator. The specific details are too gruesome for polite company, but let's just say the rusty metal found vital organs that are supposed to stay inside the body. Cletus died in his own backyard, a victim of tensile strength limits and extreme laziness, proving that if you build a death trap, you shouldn't be surprised when it works. 10. We conclude our tour of stupidity in the concrete jungle of New York City, specifically in an abandoned industrial warehouse in Brooklyn. This rotting structure was the chosen venue for a group of college students who decided to host an underground demolition party. The concept was simple: break in, drink cheap beer, and smash things with hammers. It appealed to their primal instincts and their complete lack of understanding regarding structural engineering. Among the group was a sophomore named Chad, a young man whose gym gains were impressive but whose cognitive functions were struggling to keep up. The party was in full swing, with graffiti being sprayed and windows being shattered, but Chad wanted to make a bigger impact. He found a massive sledgehammer in a corner, left behind by a construction crew years ago. He looked around for the ultimate target. His eyes settled on a thick concrete pillar in the center of the ground floor. It was cracked, covered in moss, and looked ready to go. What Chad failed to realize, because his major was philosophy, not architecture, was that this was a primary load-bearing column. It was literally the spine of the building, holding up the 3 floors of concrete and steel above them. Chad swung the hammer. Wham! A chunk of concrete flew off. The crowd cheered, filming him on their phones. "I'm gonna bring it down," Chad yelled, fueled by adrenaline and the applause of idiots. He swung again, and again. He was chipping away at the hourglass of his own life. With a final, Herculean swing, Chad smashed through the rebar core. The pillar didn't just crack, it buckled. The sound was deafening, a groan of stressed metal that vibrated in everyone's teeth. The laws of physics, which had been patiently waiting for Chad to finish his set, suddenly enforced gravity. The ceiling didn't collapse slowly, it pancaked. The entire second floor, weighing hundreds of tons, slammed down onto the first floor in the blink of an eye. The building did exactly what buildings do when you remove their legs. It sat down. Chad was standing at ground zero. He didn't even have time to drop the hammer. The dust cloud billowed out into the street, covering the neighborhood in a gray shroud. When the fire department arrived, they found a scene that looked like a bomb had gone off. Chad had successfully demolished the pillar, and in a twist of cruel irony, the pillar had demolished him. He died instantly, flattened by the very roof he was trying to bring down, earning a posthumous degree in applied gravity and a permanent spot in the Darwin Award's Hall of Fame. We've just seen the gold medalists of bad decision-making, but let's be honest, we've all qualified for the preliminaries. I want a confession in the comments. What is the single stupidest way you've almost accidentally killed yourself? The most embarrassing confession gets likes. If you want to keep your survival streak alive, hit that like button and subscribe. Don't be like Barnaby. Class dismissed.